At allpointstv.com, and we are very glad to see you out there, and hope you stay tuned for the next hour. We are going to be doing a few things here today on the Constitution because I want to focus your attention on the persecution and prosecution of this president. They will not allow him to have any peace because they fear the voters are going to do that which they thought they're going to close the doors to the possibility of this person coming back. But a lot of things happen on the way to the 2024 election, and none of what they intended has worked. And I think we're going to have another Donald Trump on our hand if they can't do better than what they're doing. I'm gonna be talking about the really. I'm going to be talking about the Constitution. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know where they're getting their idea of what the rule of law is in this country. The rule of law in this country is the Constitution of the United States. It's not the Supreme Court. It's not the 5-4 verdicts. It's what the Constitution says, and their job on the Supreme Court is to interpret the document laid out by the framers. And the Supreme Court, which has become all-powerful, was really considered to be the weakest of the three branches of government. And how this court has risen to the top now to have the last word in the Constitution is beyond anything that was intended. And you can read the Federalist Papers for yourself to see that they thought, this is Hamilton speaking in the one I'm talking about here, something in the high 70s of the 85 Federalist Papers where they talk about the Supreme Court. And in that Federalist paper, they're talking about the judicial branch not having more power and more authority than the other two. I mean, making the law and then enforcing the law and then interpreting the law. The interpretation of the law is just simply look at the wording of the law. If there's any dispute about it, have a third party come in to arbitrate any dispute that comes up about what the language means. And if we all have English background, we're an English-speaking country, and we can read the language fairly well. We're literate. There should not be any doubt about what the Constitution requires, because one thing the framers didn't do, they didn't go in there and start trying to give wiggle room in the language. And their use of the word shall, and I think shall is in, let's see, the word shall is in every part of the Constitution except the 10th Amendment. And whenever you see the word shall written in the document, take that as an intended order. Because what the Constitution is doing is that it is ordering the government to limit its outreach to that which is in fact tendered to it in the exercise of its duties. And anything that is not attenuated in its duties, then the government does not have the authority to carry that out. So when you start when I read Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, I want you to pay very strict attention to the language here, because if they understood this language, and they don't seem to understand it, but I'm not so sure if they did understand it, they would follow it, because it's what Napolitano said. The Constitution is a document that's in exile. They're not following the Constitution in this country. they just decided what they're going to do is cast the document to cast a document to the side, and it's full steam ahead during the torpedoes, which is all the minefields that come up, because if you're not following the law, then you have a lot of problems being created, because if there is no rule of law, then what you have here is chaos in the law, because the Constitution being dismissed. What are you going to use as a parameter to judge the extent and boundaries of the authority of the three branches of government if it's not the Constitution of the United States? And I'm very much aware that the late Florida senator, no, in fact, Alcee Hastings was a late Florida representative who said in a braggadocious way, said the law is what we, and when he said we, he's talking about the members of the Congress, the law is what we say it is. And that raises should have raised a lot of eyebrows, because if the law is what they say it is, then the law is arbitrary. They might say one thing on let's say today is Monday, and by Friday they change their mind and they're saying something else. If it's just what they say it is, they can say anything. But that's not the intention. The intention is to have a written law, have it written in simple English. There are very few big words in this document. My grandfather could have read this document. When he read to us when we were children, he would get to a certain part in the reading, would say he'd be reading everything that's in the book, and he'd say big word and he'd skip over it. And we say, Granddad, we don't, you're skipping over some parts that we don't know how you leave it out and we still make sense of the story. But he always say, so and so and so and so, big word, and keep going. Well, there are no big words in here, but you got to go and get a dictionary and read it. It's the language is very civil, meaning the language is very easy to understand. And in reading it, and I'm going to be reading Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, I want to advise all the ones who are prosecuting, and really it's not even prosecuting anymore, it's persecuting, those who are persecuting Donald Trump will understand the limits of your encounter in that regard, because this man was a former president of the United States. And we need to understand that office, because the president is the executive branch of government, unlike the other two branches where they have multiple members. But in the presidency, all the executive power of the president, all the executive power of the executive branch, let's put it that way, resides in the president of the United States. And because of the specific duties that's carried out by the president, for example, the president appoints all of the civil officers of the United States. All the civil officers of the United States are appointed by the president of the United States. If people understand that, they'd understand then why it is, and I'm telling this to Alan Dershowitz, they will understand why it is that impeachment is in Article 1, but the removal of the impeached office holder is in Article 2. Article 1 lays out impeachment, tells what branch of government impeaches and what branch of government tries the impeachment. That's laid out in Article 1, because that's the role of the Congress. The House shall have the sole power of impeachment, and the Senate shall have the sole power to try the impeachment. But where the confusion comes in is when they start talking about the removal based upon the impeachment. And if you read the Constitution, you understand it, then you can understand that, and I don't think anybody understands this point. I've not heard anything that lends itself to me thinking that they understand it. And in fact, it never has been carried out with this understanding before in the history of the country. And that is that you don't have to remove the office holder because the office holder is impeached. And if I say that, then it also would mean this then, that the matter that is in fact brought to up in the House and the House impeaches, because the authority of the two bodies of the Congress are separate and distinct and given distinct responsibilities, the House doesn't even have to refer the impeachment to the Senate. Now, I know they're going to have a lot of problems with that, because every time they've had an impeachment, it's all been referred to the Senate. But that's another misunderstanding that we're talking about in terms of the document. I mean, it's amazing that I'm no longer amazed by it. I keep saying it's amazing. It is amazing to me, but it's no longer surprising to me. I'm amazed by it because we have a runaway government, because we got people running the government that don't understand. They swear to uphold the Constitution. They don't understand what it is they're swearing to uphold.
I've had a woman I dated. She had worked for the FBI, and she was like saying, "You don't know what it's like to swear a bureaucratic oath." And I went, "Okay, you're swearing an oath, but do you?" She goes, "We're only doing what we allow by the Constitution." I said, "Then what's in the Constitution?" She couldn't answer that. I said, "So how do you know everything you're doing is applicable or allowable by the Constitution if you don't know what's in the Constitution?"
Right.
She was just the law, so it was like crickets when I asked her that question.
Yeah, I remember that one that incident where someone was reading to one of the scholars. They were reading the first 10 amendments, the so-called Bill of Rights. And the person was listening to this and said, "This is revolution they're talking about here, and that can't be constitutional." And what they were reading was the 10 amendments in the Constitution. The guy thought they were reading the Communist Manifesto. I mean, we need to get back to read my article today on Facebook. I'm writing some things. I'm trying to say some things to the country, because I don't think we can solve the problem we're facing right now as the United States of America. And I don't even know how we say those words anymore, United States of America, because we're not a United States anymore. We are a administrative state. We are the administrative states of America. What's the other thing I can say about that? Because it's bureaucratic states, but we're not the United States of America, because we're so disunited. And I think that we're more disunited because we do not come around a common agreement of what is allowed and what is stated in the document that governs the whole country. The whole country is governed by this document. It's not like one state does this and another state does something else. All of the states fall under the same umbrella, and the umbrella of all of them is the Constitution of the United States that was in fact drafted by the framers. Spent a lot of time between May 25th, 1787 and September the 17th of that year. Between that time period, they had put together a draft of the Constitution to be now submitted to the states for ratification by 2/3 ratified by 2/3 of the states, which would at that point have been 9, because there were 13 states, and therefore to be ratified by 9 of the 13 states at that point. But they didn't ratify it so that the other 4 would not have to follow the guidelines that's laid out. It was ratified with the amount of votes necessary for there to be a common agreement about all the states that would in fact follow it. And although Rhode Island wasn't even there at the convention, but as a part of the United States, they were in fact compelled by the agreement by a supermajority to be bound by the terms of it, that they were all in fact under, because it had been endorsed by the sufficient number of the states that had in fact ratified the document. And I want you to also understand here that every time you see anything having to be agreed to, the ratification of the Constitution, for example, the election of the President of the United States, a single office holder of the executive branch of government, the states are involved in that. In fact, the states elect the President of the United States, and that's the purpose of the Electoral College. It's the states, the governing body. And I would argue, I don't even think I have to argue this. I just have to simply lay it out there and make it clear that's the intent. The intent was not for the Supreme Court to get the last word on what this document says. In fact, since I know that was to be determined by the states, if you get 2/3 of the states to agree that the language says X, Y, and Z, rather than A, B, C, which is what the court said it says, the X, Y, Z interpretation countermands the agreement of the 9 judges of the Supreme Court. In other words, the states were to have the last word. They have never exercised that, although the Kentucky resolutions and so on and so forth, we're talking about, and even the, when I was listening to Dr. King talk, I don't think he knew a lot. He was not trained in, he was trained in theology. But he said some words here that I don't think he quite understood the import of the words in his I Have a Dream speech. We talked about the governor of Alabama, who has his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. And he was criticizing the governor for having the idea that he, talking about George Wallace here, had brought up the possibility of nullifying acts of the Supreme Court. Now, of course, the one governor cannot do it because you see, the framers were very bothered by majority rule, but they knew that majority rule, single majority rule, is mob rule, and they were very concerned about not having mob rule in the country. They understood it could really begin to create chaos by a majority coming down in inappropriate ways against those who did not have the voice of the majority, did not speak in the voice of the majority. So the framers made sure that a single majority was not the way in which we did business in this country. You choose a president, for example. I know they're trying to make it a simple majority, but to choose a president in this country takes multiple majorities. It's a brilliant design when you think about it, because the framers, and you can go and read Farrow's paper 10. Well, 9 and 10. 9 is written by Alexander Hamilton. And that discussion that Hamilton had in 9 is picked up by James Madison in Farrow's paper 10. And it picks up this idea of factions, majority factions. Factions are people, you call them parties today. These are party factions. This group feels this way, that group feels another way. So if this group has more people in it, they don't have to listen to these people over here in this other group because they don't have the numbers, and a simple majority can overwhelm them and get their will without having anyone that can intervene and make another decision, because their single voice carries the day. The framers are too smart to allow that to go on. And the Constitution speaks to that in terms of a supermajority that's required, for example, to amend the Constitution of the United States. It takes 2/3 proposal to amend the Constitution, but then it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. Proposed by 2/3, and the only way we've ever proposed it, but it's not the only way you can propose a amendment to the Constitution, but the only way it's ever been proposed is the 2/3 of the members of the House, 2/3 of the members of the Senate. They propose it, but guess where it goes after they propose the amendment? It goes to the states for ratification. And then it takes 3/4 of the states, 38 states today, to add to the document. So I'm laying a foundation here for when I read Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, because I want us to understand that the document has certain specifics in it, and those specifics are there for a reason. And if the people that are prosecuting and persecuting Trump understood that, they would know their hand is being ordered to be stayed in what they're doing. They're being ordered in this document to stay their hand in what they're doing. Now I'm going to explain this to all of the scholars, because I am convinced that none of them understand Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 and what it does. I'm going to teach it to all of you, because that was there, placed where it was placed for a reason. As part of the impeachment process, but it's there as the last part that deals with impeachment in the document as a final word in the impeachment process. Now, in Article 2, that process is not found there. What that process is, the use of the process for removal, but the removal is in Article 2. Article 1 deals with the process, with the fact that you have the impeachment in one body of the Congress, you have the trial in the other body of the Congress, if the impeachment body so chooses to put it there. I'm adding that because that has always happened, but it's not mandated by the document. You can impeach folks without referring it to the Senate. The only time you put it in the Senate for trial, the only time you place it in the Senate is for the trial. And the only reason why it should be placed on trial is if you're trying to ferret removal. But the process does not have to lend itself to removal. That's why removal is not in Article 1. You see, I've said this before, but I want to make it clear again. You see, there's a geography to this document. These people are in that room. They're not in that room wasting time, throwing popcorn in the air and all of that. They're sitting there making sure they put a document together that was seamless. And it is seamless. It is coherent, and it is non-contradictory. And that is a point of amazement. And if you served on any committees in these large groups, and you break off into different sections, you know how difficult it is to come back together and then put everything you got from each group meeting separately, and then mend all that together and blend it into a whole, where the whole group now have a single document come out of what they were doing in smaller groups. That's very difficult to do. But they did it in that convention. And nobody has been able to create a document that did not lend itself to this document as a measuring stick, so to speak, a boundary of how you create a constitution. This is the document here that does that. And so when they wrote the impeachment, the last word in impeachment was Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. That's the last word. The rest of Article 1, and there are 10 sections to it. There are 10 sections of Article 1. The last section that deals with impeachment is Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. And Clause 7 is the last clause of Article 1, Section 3.
I put it up there?
Yeah, put it up there, John, and let me read it as they are watching it on the screen, because I want to explain what this document is saying. It's very crucial. Okay, what you're reading there in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, here's what you're reading. Judgment in cases of impeachment. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Now, let me raise a question with the scholars. If you laid out in the Constitution who impeaches, what body impeaches, and you stated in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, the House shall have the sole power of impeachment. And then in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, you laid out that the Senate shall have the sole power to try impeachment. Then before leaving the impeachment process, they leave it with Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. And it says there, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Now, why would they end the impeachment process, the protocols for it? Why would they end with that clause? Because you would think that it's sufficient to say the House does this part of the job and the Senate does this part of the job. And then in the Article 2, here's how they can be removed based upon the process. But they didn't do that. They put something in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. And the question is, why is that there? I'm talking to you scholars. Why is that there? And let me tell you why it's there. And I want Letitia James to understand this. I want the guy that has been appointed by Merrick Garland to go after Trump to understand this, because they're both out of control and out of place, out of sync, because what they're doing is not allowed by the document. Now, why is that there? Why is Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 there? It's because Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of the Constitution does a separation of powers. And the lines of demarcation between the three branches of government are such that no branch can assume the authority by coming into the space of the other body and doing anything that rescinds the other body from acting within the domain of that body's jurisdiction without carrying out some constitutional mandate. What the Constitution does, it puts a hedge around each of the three branches of government. It spells out specifically what they can do. And what it does not say they can do, they cannot do. That's why the powers are delegated. There are powers inherent also, but you cannot do what Hamilton did, and that's say that there are implied powers in the Constitution. There are no implied powers. I know that's what you're teaching. There are no implied powers. There are inherent powers. There are delegated powers. There are enumerated powers. You can say all of that. You cannot say, as Hamilton did, implied powers.
Implied powers. As soon as you said that to me, it would just be, that's too open-ended. I mean, that could be changed rapidly day to day.
Yeah, that's right. See, you see the problem. If you say the implied powers, then there's a mood issue that today it may imply to you they're saying this. The next day it might be another mood shift. And it might be seen as the implication being something different. You can imply the language out of existence by saying it implies something that doesn't imply. The question is not what it implies. The question is what it says explicitly in the document. So Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 is there as the last word in terms of the procedure to be carried out. And why is it there in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7? It's there because in the separation of powers, there's a hedge around the legislative branch of government. No other branch of government can, in fact, make law. You cannot legislate from the bench because of the hedge around the legislative branch of government, so it can singly and only make law in the country. Now, I know judges think they can make law called legislating from the bench. You know what we need to start doing in this country? Quite frankly, I know it would be very controversial. We need to start invoking what the framers put in place in this country. Some of these judges need to be impeached and subject to removal from office. I'm talking about federal judges, to remove from office by these violations of the Constitution that they are engaged in. We've had 15 judges impeached. 6 of them have been removed. It should be more given what they're doing right now. None of them are fearful of being called in on what they're doing. They're doing a lot of things here. They cannot be tended by the authority of the court. So what is Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 doing? It is, in fact, allowing for the hedge to be removed from around the president and the others too, if that needs to be in the president's case, if the president needs to be brought up on charges for malfeasance in office, violating his oath of office, there's a way to bring about restitution, although he is a single office holder of the executive branch of government. But his authority has to be limited through a process. He can be prosecuted only through the process that's open to the president through impeachment. And why is that true? Because if you can wait until the president leaves office and then charge the president for having done something that he did while he was in office, you can bring charges against the president because you didn't like him and so on and so forth, and then begin to harass the president as they're doing Donald Trump. But you see, you can't do any of that unless you go through Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 first. You can't be a Johnny-come-lately here. Because what Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 does is that it removes the hedge from around the president by bringing about a conviction of the charges against the president, and those charges are specific to removal. That's found in Article 2, Section 4. The president and vice president and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. On just those charges can the president be removed. What Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 does then says that in order to charge a president after he has left office, unless you've gone through this process of removal and conviction, then once he leaves office, that's a done deal. That hedge around the president remains. That's why that's there. Because the president, being the single office holder, can be harassed by the other two branches of government, single him out, get him later. And Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 stays the government's hand against being able to do that, to target the president, the CEO of the executive branch once he leaves office. If he leaves office before the president's been impeached and convicted on specific charges found in Article 2, Section 4, unless that happens, that hedge around the president remains. And they impeached Donald Trump twice, trying to remove the hedge, and were unable to do so. Sorry, you can't do it now. The hedge remains, and Donald Trump cannot be brought under the Constitution of the United States into a court of law for what he did as president of the United States. Why? Because the separation of power still stands. And they cannot go into that separation because they did not bring about impeachment and conviction of charges that would have brought about removal. Donald Trump was not removed. He stepped down after they claimed he lost the election. And by stepping down, he did another thing as well. He took away the claim that there was an insurrection. Because when at the time of the meeting on the 6th of January, if Trump was involved in an insurrection on January the 6th, then Trump is involved in an insurrection against the government that he was over at that time, because he's not stepping down for another 14 days. The president is inaugurated on the 20th of January. On the 20th of January, Donald Trump stepped down from the presidential office because they said he lost the election. said he lost the election. The election, in fact, was unconstitutionally carried out because it did not meet the requirements of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. I'll read that to you as well. Because the electors are to be chosen by the state legislatures. The process is set up for that. In Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, assign that to the state legislatures, not to those bodies that did it in Pennsylvania, where they were changing it as the process was going forward. They were changing the process while the election was getting ready to happen. They didn't have enough time to ram it through the state legislature, so they didn't change the law outside of the state legislative body. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, in fact, given the violation that occurred, those votes should not have been counted. Now, the problem it brings up is that you disenfranchised voters because it's not their fault their vote is not being counted. So what should have happened, given the fact that the vote cannot be counted, what the state should have done is go back to correct the error. And that's Mike Pence. That's why I was glad to see Mike Pence drop out this past week, running for president. This man does not belong anywhere close to power ever again. Because Mike Pence tried to act like he was maintaining the integrity of the Constitution. The man was violating the Constitution. You had two objections on the floor on the 6th of January, and neither one of them was in fact heard. And that's why you have to look at this insurrection again, because it was not in the interest of anyone that went to Washington to demonstrate against the counting of those votes to create a disturbance, because they would have been able then, by remaining calm, to then call for the process to be carried out as mandated by the Electoral Act of 1887, wherein if you have a objection in the House and in the Senate, then before those votes that have been turned into the Senate for counting, both bodies are really sitting there for the vote to be counted. But the vice president's job as the president of the Senate was to hear the objections, and it was in the interest of those who went to Washington not to create a disturbance so that the process could be carried out. That's why I know that they were not the ones doing what they claim was insurrection there. They went there to make sure that the Congress carried out its responsibilities to make sure the election was in fact made whole. And the objection needed to have been heard by the Congress in order to do that. The disturbance canceled that out. And that's why the question needs to be raised. I hope it will be raised if Donald Trump gets into office. He should raise it, because we need some answers here about who were those persons involved in that insurrection. We need to have an answer to Ray Epps is. And then to find out what was the job that was not carried out by Mike Pence, because Pence did not carry out his job. Pence was constitutionally bound to hear the objection. You had an objection in the House, it was seconded in the Senate, or vice versa. And by having it in both houses, then the question then is raised on the floor. what Pence should have done, based on the Act of 1887, he should have sent the vote once they met in the different chambers and came back with a verdict of no confidence in the vote. At that point, Pence could have ordered the votes in question to be remanded back to the states for the process to be corrected. I think you really have to throw the vote out, but I don't think you want to disenfranchise voters. It's not their fault. So what Pence could have done is let the two chambers meet based on the objection, come back with a remedy of how they're going to fix it. At the least that could be done is have the objections placed back to the states for the states to do the process based upon the error, put it back in the hands of the state legislature in those 5 or 6 states where there was a question about how they carried the process out, and took it out of the hands of the state legislatures, which you cannot do based upon Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. By putting it back in those states and having to redo the process, then you would have a verdict commensurate with what the Constitution requires. But that violation should not have stood, given the fact that that violation was there, to be addressed by Mike Pence as the president of the Senate. Mike Pence did not do his job, and they're commending this man. This man is involved in an egregious act. This is a very dangerous thing, because the president is the only office holder that the whole country votes for.
He's here where he dropped his bid to run for president, which I knew was he shot himself in the foot months ago.
They never forgave him for it, and he paid a price for it. He didn't even make it to the first primary. His poll numbers were so bad. The man was only running about at best around 4%. It came out this past week that Nikki Haley has caught up with DeSantis. They're now tied for second place. DeSantis got 16% approximately of the vote, and so does Nikki Haley. That's now they're now matched. None of them are going to catch Donald Trump, and I hope that Donald Trump, once he gets the nomination, will not, in fact, hope he won't do this. Hope he will not choose one of them as his running mate. None of the I think it's now 6 of them that are left. I don't think that Trump should consider any of them as a running mate because of the stabbing in the back that they engaged in. 2 of them were members of his administration, Mike Pence and Nikki Haley. They certainly shouldn't be his choice for VP. Really, none of them should be, not including Vivek Ramaswamy.
I don't like that guy at all. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, it's like, I don't like any of the Republicans offering, and I never will vote for a Democrat. I mean, unless somebody walked in the polling booth with a gun held to my head and threats to kill my family, that's the only way I would actually vote for any Democrat. So,
yeah, you didn't remove the hedge, folks. They did not do it. They impeached Trump, trying to get an edge on him by thinking that they would impeach him the second time. And because he was leaving office 7 days after the second impeachment, they impeached him the second time, January the 13th. The first impeachment fell through and didn't result in impeachment in October of 2020. And that's when the coronavirus was brought out. The timeline needs to be looked at. They tried they thought they're going to be able to convict Trump. They thought given the fact he's going out in 7 days from the time of the second impeachment, they'd be able to get a conviction once he had left office. You know, the trial was after Trump had left office. They made the charge before he left, which you have to do that, by the way, before the office holder leaves office. You have to impeach while the office holder is still in office. You cannot impeach the office holder once he leaves office. You can continue the trial, but the impeachment has to be before the office holder leaves the official position. And that's why they rushed in the second impeachment, which was January the 13th, 2021. You would think that he only has 7 more days. So what would the impeachment be about? It's about barring him from, they wanted to convict him and then bar him from ever running again. If you impeach and convict the president and you do not, in fact, come back behind the impeachment and then and the conviction and then have another vote that disallows him from running again and have not done that, then you have not kept him from running again. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. On one hand, it removes the hedge from around the president if he is in fact impeached and convicted, and then it allows for the president to be tried in a court of law if you carried out impeachment and conviction. If you have not carried it out, then the president cannot be brought into a court of law. Why is that true? Because the separation of powers still stands, even after leaving office. What Donald Trump did in office as president, because he was not convicted while he was of anything while he was in office, it was not convicted, then whatever he did at that time of his presidency, even if it was in fact illegal or whatever you want to, unconstitutional or any of that, it becomes a moot question. Once there is no conviction, you cannot open that can of worms back up. That's what Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 does. And if they understood that, they would not be out here making mockery of this document, which is what they're doing. The Constitution is being mocked. And the world is watching this mockery. You'd be surprised at how much prestige this country has lost. They want this president, they're so fearful of what is going to happen, and they should be fearful because the government is out of control. I did an article today on this question. And this is the Bible on this question. By that I mean there's nobody that's going to come behind what was written and say anything different about what was in fact claimed in that article. The hedge remains around Donald Trump because it was not removed through the use of the impeachment process. And because of that, you cannot bring the president up upon any charge of what he did while he was president. Now, does that apply for things he has done after he left the presidency? It doesn't apply to that. If they're claiming that Donald Trump was ordered to do something, and it's in their view to order him to do something today that he didn't do, then there's no umbrella that is over him to protect him from prosecution, and there's no, I don't even consider prosecution as persecution, but from prosecution in that case. But it cannot be that Donald Trump took some files out of the White House as president. Cannot be that. Because the president has the right to take his files with him. And they say, well, the documents were classified. They stopped being classified when he removes them. I know you're saying out here that the president must go through a process. Says who? Who can tell the president of the United States in the distinct separation of powers how the president of the United States, duly authorized as the executive branch of government, he is the executive branch of government, what body can tell the president how he is to classify or declassify documents? They're declassified by his interaction with the documents. If he, in fact, discusses the documents with any one, as they're claiming that he did, as president, the documents, by the mere fact that he is discussing it, become declassified. He declassifies it by his action in terms of how he is, in fact, dealing with the document. It starts being classified by the president's actions in talking about the document to people who do not have the clearance to have that discussion about that document. By the president discussing it with them, that document can become declassified because of the discussion. Do you scholars agree with that? Because if you don't agree with that, then you don't understand the separation of powers. The Supreme Court cannot tell the president how to declassify, nor can the legislative branch of government. If that were true, there would be no separation of powers. And that hedge remains around Trump because the use of the impeachment process did not, in fact, take him out of office through conviction in the Senate. And by not doing that, the separation stands today with Donald Trump. Those are the facts. And there's not one scholar in this country, not one, that's qualified to say anything different. I'm challenging all of you about that. Go read Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, and say different about it. Okay, that's it for this session here. Donald Trump cannot be brought to trial. And if they do that, they are violating the Constitution of the United States.
By the way, I do want to add this. I've been scrolling on the banner too. I want you to know, because I haven't told you bore, your show, What's Going On with George Moss, is now can be seen on Spotify as well, another platform.
Okay.
So just increase your possible influence. So anyway, I've been scrolling on the banner for the past few minutes. So
okay.
All right. So
I want you to always follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.